The swing creaked with each slow pass, the sound hollow in the cold air. Daniel kept one hand on Rook's lead as they crossed the frost-hardened grass, his boots crunching softly. The girl didn't look up until they were just a few steps away. Her hair hung loose around her face, damp from the mist. She gripped the chains of the swing tightly, her little boots barely scraping the ground. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel crouched so they were eye level. "That's all right. You don't have to. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her eyes flicked past him, to Rook. The dog stood still, head slightly tilted, ears pricked forward. The girl leaned closer. "But I think you need to know something." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What's that?" She cupped her mittened hands to her mouth and said something so quietly Daniel barely caught the words. But Rook did. His ears snapped forward, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Daniel's breath fogged in the cold air as he studied her face. She couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8 at most. Her voice had been so soft he wasn't even sure he'd heard her right, but Rook's sudden change in posture told him she'd said something important. The dog's growl was low and steady, not the explosive bark he used for warning strangers, but the kind he gave when something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Daniel kept his own tone even. "What did you just say?" The girl bit her lip, eyes darting toward the woods beyond the chain-link fence. "I can't say it again. He might hear me." Daniel followed her gaze. The mist clung low to the ground, winding between bare tree trunks like something alive. His years in uniform, both military and police, had taught him to trust silence as much as sound. And right now, the silence beyond that fence was too complete. He tried again. "Is your mom or dad nearby?" She shook her head quickly, then tightened her grip on the swing's chains. "He said if I talk to you, I can't go home." Daniel shifted slightly so he could glance at Rook without taking his eyes off her. The canine's stare was locked on the treeline, ears still forward, every muscle ready. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently. She hesitated, then murmured, "Ellie." "Okay, Ellie. My name's Daniel, and this here's Rook. We just want to make sure you're safe." For a moment, her eyes softened at the dog's name. She looked at Rook, and her voice dropped even further. "He knows you're here now." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Who does?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. Instead of answering, she slid off the swing and stepped closer to Rook. The dog didn't move away, in fact, he shifted slightly to face her, his tail stiff but not hostile. She leaned close to him and whispered something directly into his ear. Daniel couldn't hear it, but whatever it was, Rook's reaction was instant, his ears flattened, his nostrils flared, and his eyes cut sharply back toward the woods. Daniel stood slowly. "Ellie, I need you to tell me what's going on." Before she could answer, a sound cut through the mist, a sharp metallic clink, like a chain shifting against metal. Ellie froze. Her eyes went wide, her breathing shallow. Daniel scanned the treeline. "Rook." The K9 moved in front of Ellie, placing himself between her and the fence, body low and ready. The clink came again, this time followed by the faintest crunch of footsteps on frozen ground. Daniel's hand went to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Rains. I'm at Miller's Creek Playground, west side near the woods. I have a juvenile female, possible distress, unknown persons in the area. Request backup, priority." Static crackled before the reply came. "Copy, Rains. Units en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Out here, with no eyes on whoever was in those woods, that was a lifetime." Daniel kept his voice calm. "Ellie, we're going to step away from the fence, nice and slow. Okay?" She didn't answer, just nodded faintly, her gaze still fixed on the trees. They took a step back. Then another. Rook moved with them, never turning his back to the fence. Halfway across the frost-covered grass, something shifted in the mist, a shadow, tall and narrow, slipping between two trees. Daniel's instincts screamed. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be seen, but they weren't hiding well enough for him to miss it. Inside voice, he murmured to Ellie. "How long have you been here?" She hesitated. Since it was still dark. That meant hours. And no adult had come looking. "Why are you here alone?" Daniel pressed. She glanced at him, her eyes shining with something between fear and guilt. "Because, he said this is where I'd be safe. But only if I didn't talk to you." Another metallic clink echoed, closer this time. Daniel decided. "We're leaving. Now." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, shaking her head hard. "If we leave, he'll follow." "Ellie." "He always follows." Daniel crouched so they were eye level again. "Then we'll make sure he can't." She studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Finally, she reached for his hand. As soon as her mitten touched his glove, Rook barked once, sharp, commanding, the kind of bark he used when he wanted immediate movement. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Move." They crossed the playground quickly, boots crunching over the frost-hardened ground. Rook stayed ahead by a few feet, scanning side to side with that sharp, searching motion Daniel had learned to trust more than his own eyes. When they reached the patrol SUV, Daniel opened the rear passenger door. "In." Ellie hesitated again, glancing over her shoulder toward the woods. For a heartbeat, Daniel followed her gaze. The mist had shifted, just slightly, and there, between two trees, was the faint outline of a man. He was tall, unmoving, his head tilted as if listening. Daniel's pulse spiked. He ushered Ellie into the back seat, Rook jumping in after her, still facing the woods. By the time Daniel closed the door and looked back, the man was gone. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, his movements deliberate, controlled. The urge to throw the SUV into gear and floor it was there, pulsing under his skin, but rushing could draw mistakes. And mistakes, out here, could be fatal. Rook was in the back beside Ellie, still facing the rear window, his breathing steady but alert. Every few seconds, his ears flicked toward the woods. Daniel started the engine. The low rumble filled the air, loud against the surrounding silence. He glanced in the mirror. Ellie sat stiffly, her seatbelt loose across her small frame, eyes fixed on the fogged glass. "You okay back there?" he asked, keeping his tone calm. She didn't answer. Her fingers toyed with the frayed edge of her mitten, pulling threads loose. Daniel tried again. "Ellie, I need to know if you recognize that man." Her voice was so faint he almost missed it. "I told you, I'm not supposed to talk to you." "But you already did," he reminded her gently. "And what you told me made Rook very serious." "That means it matters." She hesitated, eyes lowering. "He told me, if I told you, you'd take me away. And then no one would know where Mom is." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. "Your mom's missing?" Ellie nodded once. "When was the last time you saw her?" She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Before he came to get me." "Who is he, Ellie?" She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze darted back to the woods, and for a moment, something like guilt crossed her face, as if she'd already said too much. Daniel exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a lost child situation. There was a bigger story, and the man in the trees was part of it. He put the SUV in drive and eased forward, tires crunching on frozen gravel. As they passed the far edge of the playground, Daniel checked the side mirror. The man wasn't visible anymore, but the mist shifted unnaturally in one spot, like someone moving just beyond sight. Rook growled low, a sound that vibrated through the whole vehicle. Daniel turned onto the narrow road that led toward the main highway. "We're heading to the station," he told Ellie. "We'll keep you safe, and we'll figure out where your mom is." No, she said suddenly, her voice sharp in the enclosed space. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror. No? If we go there, he'll find me. He always finds me. The certainty in her voice sent a chill down Daniel's spine. How? She stared straight ahead. Because he knows where you take kids. He's been there before. That stopped him. If she was telling the truth, then bringing her to the station could compromise her safety, and the safety of everyone inside. Daniel slowed the SUV, pulling onto the shoulder. The snowbanks on either side muffled the outside world, and the engine's idle filled the quiet. He turned in his seat to face her. Ellie, if I don't take you there, I need to know somewhere safe we can go. Somewhere he doesn't know about. She shook her head. There isn't anywhere. Rook whined softly, his gaze shifting between Ellie and the rear window. Daniel leaned back, thinking fast. There was one place, a hunting cabin owned by an old friend, halfway up Ridgeline Road. It wasn't in any department database, and it had no connection to his work. If the man was tracking official responses, that place wouldn't be on his radar. Okay, Daniel said finally. I know somewhere we can hide until I figure this out. But you have to trust me. Ellie's voice was barely audible. I don't trust anyone. You trust Rook, he said simply. Her eyes flicked to the dog, and for the first time, the tiniest hint of relief passed over her face. She gave a small nod. That was enough for Daniel. He shifted back into gear and pulled onto the road again, this time heading away from town. The snow began to fall harder, fat flakes swirling in the wind. The wipers swept steadily, each pass revealing the twisting ribbon of road ahead. A mile out, Daniel checked the mirror, and his gut tightened. A pair of headlights had appeared through the haze, far behind them but holding steady. Could be nothing. Could be someone heading into town. But they didn't pass the turn for the main highway. Rook must have sensed it too. He turned from the rear window to Daniel, his stare intense, ears forward. Daniel's jaw clenched. Hang on. He pressed the accelerator, feeling the SUV surge forward. The road narrowed, winding between steep snowbanks. He took the next turn sharp, heading toward the unmarked trail that led to the cabin. The headlights followed. Ellie's hands gripped the seat belt. It's him, she whispered. How do you know? Her answer was immediate. Because he always follows. Daniel didn't ask anything else. He knew the truth when he heard it. The turnoff for the cabin was half hidden by a drift of snow. He slowed just enough to make the turn without skidding, the tires crunching into untouched powder. The headlights behind them shot past, but not for long. The brake lights flared, and the vehicle reversed fast, swinging toward the trail. Daniel cursed under his breath. We're not losing him that way. Rook barked once, the sound sharp and commanding. Daniel made a split-second decision. Instead of following the trail all the way to the cabin, he cut left onto a narrow path he knew wasn't meant for vehicles. The SUV jolted hard over frozen ruts, snow spraying from the tires. Ellie clung to the seat belt, eyes wide, but she didn't scream. The trees closed in on either side, the path twisting sharply. Daniel drove blind on memory, the snow cutting visibility to just a few feet. Finally, he killed the headlights, letting the SUV roll to a stop behind a thick cluster of pines. The engine ticked as it cooled in the sudden quiet. They waited. The only sound was the wind, until a low hum of an engine passed on the trail above them, slow, searching. Ellie didn't move. Rook didn't blink. And Daniel kept his hand on the wheel, waiting for the right moment to move again. The sound of the other vehicle's engine faded, swallowed by the storm. Daniel kept his eyes on the narrow slice of road visible through the pines, waiting for the glow of brake lights or a sudden turn back toward them. Rook's breathing was slow but deep, nostrils flaring slightly. He wasn't just listening, he was scenting. Daniel trusted that more than sight right now. If Rook didn't move, the man hadn't doubled back yet. Ellie's voice came so quietly he almost missed it. He doesn't like it when people hide from him. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror. That's exactly why we're doing it. Her gaze dropped to her lap, fingers worrying at the threads of her mitten again. It never works. Something about the flat certainty in her tone tightened his chest. Maybe it hasn't worked before. But you weren't with us before. She looked up just enough for her eyes to meet Rook's. The dog's steady stare seemed to anchor her for a moment. When Daniel judged the time was right, he restarted the engine. The muffled rumble was loud in the hush of the snow. He didn't turn the headlights on yet, just eased the SUV forward, following the narrow, rutted path deeper into the pines. The snow here was untouched, falling heavier with each passing minute. The trees leaned over the trail, their bare branches swaying in the wind. It was the kind of terrain that made tracks easy to spot, which meant if the man found this path, he'd know exactly where they'd gone. They needed to move fast but quiet. After another half-mile, Daniel stopped again, shutting off the engine and letting the storm cover their sound. He turned in his seat to face Ellie. "I need you to tell me something important," he said softly. "How did you end up at the playground this morning?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "He brought me there." "From where?" She hesitated. "A house. Not mine. It was old. The walls smelled like smoke, but not from a fire. The kind that gets into everything." Daniel made mental notes. An abandoned structure. Possibly used often enough to smell of cigarette or wood smoke. "Did you see anyone else there?" She shook her head. "Just him." Rook shifted in the back seat, eyes narrowing toward the rear window. Daniel followed his gaze, nothing but a white blur, but the dog's focus sharpened his own instincts. He reached for the radio again. "Dispatch, Rains. Any units near Ridgeline Road?" A pause, then the reply, "Negative, Rains. Closest unit is still 10 minutes out." 10 minutes again. He felt the clock pressing against his ribs. Ellie's voice broke through his thoughts. "He doesn't like dogs." Daniel turned back to her. "What makes you say that?" "Because when he saw Rook, his face got wrong. Like he was mad, but he was trying not to be. And then he told me to stay away from him." Daniel's jaw tightened. That was good. If the man had a reason to avoid Rook, they could use it. He looked at the dog. "You hear that, partner? You're already in his head." Rook didn't react beyond a blink, but Daniel could feel the dog's readiness, a coiled spring waiting for the right moment. They pressed on, the trail curving sharply before dropping into a shallow ravine. Daniel kept the headlights off, using only the pale ambient light from the snow to guide him. The cabin was just ahead now, a low, single-story structure with a pitched roof and dark shutters. It was built for hunting weekends, not comfort, but it was solid and, most importantly, unregistered in any police database. Daniel pulled up behind it, hidden from the road. He cut the engine and motioned for silence. The only sound was the hiss of snow against the windshield. He got out first, scanning the tree line, then opened the rear door for Ellie and Rook. The girl hesitated before stepping into the deep snow, but Rook moved beside her, keeping close enough for her to grab his fur if she needed balance. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The wood stove sat cold in the corner, a stack of split logs waiting beside it. Daniel shut the door quickly and locked it, then crossed to the window to pull the heavy curtains closed. "Stay away from the windows," he told Ellie. "And keep Rook close." She nodded, pulling the dog's head down to rest her mittened hands on his neck. Rook didn't move away, just stood there, watching her quietly. Daniel went to work lighting the stove. The fire caught slowly, but soon a small warmth spread through the room, cutting the sharp edge off the cold. Only then did he allow himself to breathe a little deeper. But Rook didn't relax. The dog stood by the door, his body rigid, ears angled towards something beyond the walls. Daniel crossed to him. "What is it?" he murmured. Rook didn't move his gaze. Daniel listened. At first, there was nothing but the soft pop of the stove's wood. Then, faint, almost lost under the wind, came the crunch of snow under deliberate footsteps. Someone was out there. Ellie froze, eyes locked on the door. "He found us," she whispered. Daniel's hand went to his sidearm. "Stay here." He moved to the window, just enough to pull the curtain back an inch. Through the falling snow, a figure emerged at the edge of the tree line, tall, wrapped in a dark coat, his head angled toward the cabin like he already knew they were inside. Daniel let the curtain fall back into place, his jaw tightening. The figure hadn't moved from the tree line, but the stillness was more unsettling than if he'd been approaching. It was the kind of patience Daniel recognized, a predator's patience. Rook's low growl rumbled in the confined space, his gaze still locked on the door. The sound was steady, controlled, the canine's way of saying "I see him. I know what he is." Ellie stood a few feet away, her hands gripping the hem of her coat. She wasn't crying, but her wide, unblinking stare told Daniel she didn't need to be told who was outside. She already knew. Daniel kept his voice low, steady. "Ellie, listen to me. We're safe as long as we stay in here. The doors are locked, and I'm armed. Rook's here too. He's not getting in without a fight." She didn't answer, but her knuckles whitened against her coat. Daniel moved to the small wooden table by the stove, where an old CB radio sat. He flipped the switch, static filled the air, rough and uneven. It wasn't ideal, he'd hoped the line would be clear enough to reach the county repeater, but the storm was building. "Rains to dispatch," he said into the mic. "I have eyes on an unidentified male near my location. Request immediate backup to Ridgeline Cabin." The static hissed, then broke. "Copy, rains, storms interfering with signal, units delayed." Daniel cut the transmission before the line dropped entirely. He didn't need the rest spelled out. They were on their own for the next stretch of time, and he had no way of knowing how long that would be. Rook shifted his weight, glancing at Daniel, then back at the door. Daniel crouched beside him. "Easy, partner. We hold the line." The figure outside still hadn't moved, but Daniel noticed something in his stance. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening. And then it clicked. He was listening for movement inside. Daniel signaled for silence. Ellie froze, following his cue. The man at the tree line took one slow step forward. Rook's ears pricked, muscles tensing. Then another step. Daniel moved to the door, keeping his voice low but firm. "Ellie, back against the wall, away from the windows. Don't move until I tell you." She obeyed, pressing herself into the narrow gap between the stove and the wall, Rook shifting slightly so he was still between her and the door. Daniel stood ready, his sidearm low but not yet raised. He wanted the man close enough for confirmation before he acted. Another step. The figure was clearer now, tall, broad-shouldered, his coat heavy and hood pulled low. His hands were at his sides, but his slow, measured pace was all wrong for someone caught in a storm by accident. Daniel raised his voice, just enough to carry outside. "Sheriff's Department. You're trespassing on private property. Stop where you are." The man stopped. For a few seconds, he didn't move at all. Then, and Daniel's skin crawled at the sight, he turned slightly, his head angling toward the exact spot where Ellie was hiding inside. It wasn't guesswork. He knew. Rook barked once, loud and sharp, the sound exploding through the cabin like a gunshot. The man stepped back into the trees. Daniel moved to the window, but by the time he reached it, the figure was gone, swallowed by the storm and the dense shadows of the pines. He turned back to Ellie. "You okay?" She nodded quickly, but her eyes darted to the door. "He'll come back." Daniel knew she was right. He started moving through the cabin, checking every window, every point of entry. The locks were old but functional, and the shutters were thick enough to hold against a casual break-in. But the man outside didn't strike him as casual. When he returned to the stove, Ellie was sitting on the floor beside Rook, her hand resting lightly on his back. The dog had finally stopped growling, but his gaze was still fixed on the door. Daniel knelt beside them. "Ellie, I need you to tell me the truth. Who is he?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He's the one who took Mom." Daniel's pulse kicked harder. "When?" "A long time ago. I thought she'd come back. But she didn't. And then he came for me." The pieces started clicking into place, but Daniel didn't like the picture they made. "Why bring you to the playground?" Her voice dropped even further. "Because he said that's where it started before." Daniel stared at her. "Before what?" She didn't answer. Outside, the snow was coming down in thick sheets now, the wind pushing it against the cabin with a steady hiss. Somewhere out there, the man was still waiting. Daniel checked his watch. If the roads were bad, backup could be 30 minutes away. Maybe more. They had to hold. Rook suddenly stood, head turning toward the side of the cabin. His ears angled sharply, nose twitching. Daniel moved to the nearest window and lifted the curtain just enough to see footprints. Fresh ones, leading from the tree-line to the cabin's side wall, and stopping directly beneath the window. He dropped the curtain and raised his weapon. If the man was testing the perimeter, it meant he was looking for a way in. Daniel's mind was already moving through contingencies, choke points, firing angles, fallback positions. The cabin was small, which meant any breach would put them in close quarters fast. Ellie spoke again, barely a whisper. "He won't stop." Daniel looked at her, then at Rook. The canine's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Then neither will we," Daniel said. Daniel stayed by the window, his breath steady, counting the seconds between the last glimpse of movement and now. Snow muffled everything, swallowing sound, but Rook's body language told him the man hadn't left. The canine's focus was fixed, his chest expanding in slow, deliberate breaths, tail stiff. Ellie sat cross-legged beside the stove, hugging her knees. The glow from the fire lit her face, but her eyes kept flicking toward the door. "He's waiting for you to make a mistake," she murmured. Daniel glanced back at her. "Then we won't give him one." He moved silently to the cabin's small kitchen area. Against the far wall, a drawer held an old hunting knife and a roll of duct tape. He slid both into his belt. Next, he checked the back door, solid, reinforced with a heavy bar. If the man tried to come in that way, he'd have to break the frame. Rook shifted suddenly, moving toward the far wall. His ears swiveled, nose lifting, then pointing downward. Daniel followed the dog's line of focus, the floorboards. There was a crawlspace under the cabin. Daniel knelt, pressing his palm lightly against the boards. The faintest vibration hummed beneath his skin, irregular but deliberate. Someone was down there. Rook's lips curled, exposing his teeth. Daniel motioned Ellie closer but kept his voice low. "There's a space under the cabin. If he's trying to get in from below, we need to move." Her face paled. "That's how he got into the other house." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Not here he won't." He guided Ellie toward the back corner of the cabin, away from the access hatch he now remembered was outside near the porch steps. Rook positioned himself between her and the center of the room, his body angled toward the vibration below. The sound stopped. For a long, tense moment, all Daniel could hear was the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of wind against the walls. Then, a metallic click from the hatch outside. Daniel moved fast. He grabbed the heavy oak chair from the table and slid it over the hatch's indoor latch point. It wasn't much, but it would add resistance if the man tried to force it from below. "Stay put," Daniel told Ellie. She nodded, gripping Rook's fur. The dog's gaze stayed on the floor, ears twitching, muscles trembling with the urge to act. The sound came again, a slow push from underneath, testing the latch. The chair legs creaked against the boards. Daniel put his weight on it, locking it in place. Then silence. Too much silence. Daniel kept his stance, waiting. He'd learned that sometimes the absence of noise was more dangerous than noise itself. A sudden thump hit the far side of the cabin wall, hard enough to rattle the window frame. Ellie gasped, her grip on Rook tightening. He was trying to divide their attention. Daniel stayed where he was. "Don't move," he warned, his tone sharp enough to keep Ellie rooted. The thump came again, this time on the opposite wall. It was a pattern. He was circling, testing for weakness. Rook broke position, padding toward the nearest window, his growl low and steady. Daniel eased toward him and risked a glance through the curtain. A dark blur moved between the trees, too fast to get a clear look, but close enough to see the size. Tall, built for strength, wearing that same heavy coat. The man stopped just inside the treeline, his face still obscured by the hood. Daniel thought he saw the glint of something in his hand, but the snow distorted the light. Daniel pulled back. "He's armed," he told Rook under his breath. The dog's growl deepened. Another thump came from the back wall. Daniel's mind raced. If the man was alone, he was trying to flush them into making a move. If he wasn't, then there could already be another threat waiting on the other side. The CB radio hissed with static again. A faint voice broke through. "Rains, road blocked, coming from the east, 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That was all they had to hold out. He checked Ellie again. She was still tucked against the wall, Rook's tail brushing her boots as he moved between guarding her and scanning the room. Daniel took a slow breath and made a decision. "Ellie, if I tell you to go into the crawlspace, you go. Don't stop, don't wait for me. Rook will go with you." Her eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. But you have to trust me." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. The next noise wasn't a thump, it was the sharp crack of splitting wood. The front porch. Daniel moved fast, positioning himself in the center of the room, sightline on the door. Rook lowered into a crouch, weight forward, ears locked on the sound. Snow swirled in as the first plank gave way. The man was here. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Not one more step," he called. The movement paused. Then, slowly, a gloved hand wrapped around the edge of the doorframe. Rook barked, a single, booming sound, and lunged forward, hitting the end of his lead with enough force to rattle the latch. The hand withdrew. Silence again. Daniel didn't move for several long seconds, keeping his weapon trained. His breath was steady, but his heart was pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his palms. Finally, footsteps retreated across the porch. The boards creaked, then stilled. The storm covered everything again. Daniel risked a glance at Ellie. She hadn't moved, but her eyes said what her mouth didn't. She knew this wasn't over. And so did he. The quiet after the retreat was worse than the noise. Daniel kept his weapon trained on the door for a full 30 seconds before slowly lowering it. He didn't holster it, not yet. His gut told him the man hadn't gone far. Rook stayed near the entry, his body taut, ears flicking toward faint sounds outside. The dog's breath came in short bursts, each exhale sending a small cloud into the cold air drifting in from the gaps around the doorframe. Ellie's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's not leaving." Daniel turned to her. "Why do you think that?" She hesitated, pulling her coat tighter around her. "Because that's not how he works. He likes to make you think you're safe." And then, she stopped, her mouth pressing shut, eyes flicking to the window. Daniel didn't press. He'd get the rest later. Right now, staying alive took priority. The wood stove popped, sending a spark up the flue. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. Daniel moved to the window on the left wall and peered out through a narrow slit in the curtain. The snow was heavier now, flakes swirling in thick curtains that blurred the treeline. Shadows shifted between the trunks, but nothing distinct. Still, his instincts screamed there was movement. He looked at Rook. "Partner, track." The K9 moved to the door, nose working at the bottom seam. Then he turned sharply toward the back wall, growling low. Daniel crossed the room and checked the rear window. Through the storm, he caught it, a quick, purposeful shape slipping between the trees. The man was circling again, just beyond the cabin's perimeter. He keyed the CB mic reins to dispatch. Suspect still on scene, moving around cabin. ETA on backup? Static, then, best estimate, 15 minutes, snow's worsening. 15 minutes. If the man decided to rush them before then, Daniel would have to hold them off alone. The crunch of snow came from the side of the cabin now, slow, deliberate steps. Rook followed the sound inside, moving parallel to it, his gaze locked. Then the noise stopped. Daniel waited, listening hard. No retreat this time. No circling. A sharp tap hit the glass of the side window. Ellie flinched, retreating further into the corner. Another tap. Not hard enough to break the glass, just enough to make its presence known. Daniel moved to the window, weapon raised, and pulled the curtain aside in one swift motion. The man stood less than 6 feet away, hood low, breath fogging in the cold. His face was shadowed, but the faint orange glow from the stove lit the curve of a smirk. Daniel locked eyes with him through the glass. "You've got 10 seconds to walk away." The man didn't move. Instead, he raised his free hand, the other still hidden in his coat, and pointed directly at Ellie through the window. Rook barked, the sound explosive in the small space. The man stepped back, then faded into the snow like he'd never been there. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He turned back to Ellie. She was shaking now, her hands buried in Rook's fur. "He knows," she whispered. Daniel crossed to her. "Knows what?" "That I talked to you." Daniel kept his voice calm. "Then we keep talking. And we don't stop until we're out of here." The next noise came from the roof, a faint but distinct creak of weight shifting above them. Daniel's head snapped up. Roof access meant a higher vantage point, and the potential for an entry through the chimney or attic vent. He moved quickly, scanning the ceiling until he found the small hatch near the center of the cabin. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through, but it was possible. Rook had already moved beneath it, eyes locked upward, a low rumble in his throat. "Ellie, stay here," Daniel ordered. He grabbed the broom from the corner and used the handle to shove hard against the hatch. It didn't budge, either frozen shut or blocked from above. The sound on the roof stopped. Daniel waited, broom still pressed up, listening for any sign of retreat. A sudden vibration ran down the handle, a sharp, deliberate knock from the other side of the hatch. Rook erupted in barking. Daniel yanked the broom down and backed up, weapon raised toward the ceiling. The knock came again, slower this time. Then silence. He glanced at Ellie. "He's trying to get us to open it." Her eyes were wide. What if he already can? Daniel didn't like that thought, but the hatch's lock was on the inside. Unless he had tools or something else, it should hold. The sound of movement shifted again, fading toward the edge of the roof. Seconds later, faint crunches in the snow marked his descent. Daniel moved back to the window in time to see the man slipping into the trees again, his head turning once more toward Ellie before disappearing into the white. The radio crackled. "Rains, 5 minutes out, hang tight." Daniel exhaled slowly. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until they weren't alone. But in his gut, he knew the man wasn't going to wait that long. The storm pressed in on all sides now, the cabin groaning faintly with each gust of wind. Daniel kept one ear tuned to the faint hiss of the radio, the other to the snow-packed silence outside. His finger rested lightly against the trigger guard, ready, but not jittery. Rook paced a tight line between the door and the window, every muscle strung like a wire. His eyes were alive, catching every flicker of movement, every whisper of sound that filtered through the walls. Ellie was still in the corner, but her posture had changed. She was leaning forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the door like she was listening for something Daniel couldn't hear. He crouched beside her. "What is it?" She didn't look at him. "He's closer now." Daniel scanned the room, then the windows. "You can hear him?" She nodded. "It's not the snow. It's the way he steps. Like he's waiting for the ground to talk back." It wasn't the kind of answer that made tactical sense, but something in her voice kept him from dismissing it. The crunch of footsteps outside broke the stillness again, this time heavier, more direct. Rook's head snapped toward the sound, ears stiff, tail frozen mid-sway. Daniel signaled for Ellie to stay put and move toward the door, keeping his sidearm at the ready. The steps stopped right outside, and then... tap. 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 3 deliberate knocks, slow and evenly spaced. Daniel didn't move. "Sheriff's Department." "Identify yourself." No answer. The knocks came again, louder this time. Rook's growl rose in volume, his body lowering like he was about to spring. Daniel shifted his stance, planting his feet. "Last warning." This time, instead of knocking, a voice came through, low, male, muffled by the wood but close enough that it felt like he was leaning into the door. "She shouldn't have talked to you." Ellie's breath hitched. Rook barked, sharp and rapid. Daniel's own voice was steady. "Step away from the door." The man didn't. "Open it, and I'll make this quick." Daniel took one slow breath and reached for the deadbolt, not to unlock it, but to make the sound. He turned it halfway, then let it snap back into place. The metallic click echoed in the small room. Silence outside. Then, the sound of boots retreating into the snow. Daniel didn't relax. He moved to the nearest window, pulling the curtain back just enough to watch. The figure was moving toward the back of the cabin, head low against the wind. Rook stayed at his side, tracking the movement like a shadow. The man reached the far wall and disappeared from sight. Seconds later, the sound of metal scraping would came from the direction of the crawlspace hatch again. "He's trying to get under," Daniel muttered. This time, he wasn't going to wait. He moved quickly to the kitchen, grabbing the heavy iron poker from beside the stove. Rook followed, every step matching his pace. Daniel slid the chair away from the hatch and crouched, listening. The sound was clearer now, the faint grunt of effort, the creak of wood under pressure. He slammed the poker down against the boards with a metallic clang. The noise below stopped instantly. "Not your way in," Daniel said under his breath. For a long moment, the silence held. Then came a low chuckle from beneath the floor. It was muffled but unmistakable. Ellie shivered audibly. Daniel replaced the chair and moved back to the center of the room, heart thudding. He didn't like that the man was confident enough to laugh. The radio crackled again. 2 minutes, almost there. 2 minutes. Daniel was about to respond when a sudden crash erupted from the back window. Glass shattered inward, the cold air slamming into the warm cabin. Rook lunged without hesitation, teeth bared, barking so violently the sound rattled the walls. Daniel swung toward the noise, weapon raised. A gloved arm was already reaching inside, searching for the latch. "Back!" Daniel barked, and Rook obeyed instantly, shifting just enough for Daniel to take aim. He fired once, the round hitting the wooden frame inches from the intruder's hand. The man withdrew instantly, vanishing into the snow outside. Daniel moved to the shattered window, keeping his weapon ready. The snow was too thick to see more than a few yards, but faint movement blurred at the edge of vision. A horn sounded in the distance, short, sharp, cutting through the storm. "Back up." Daniel turned back to Ellie. "We're almost out of this." She didn't smile. "He won't leave until he has me." Rook growled again, low and unwavering. The horn sounded again, closer this time, and faint blue lights flickered through the storm. Relief began to edge into Daniel's focus, but he didn't lower his weapon. They weren't done. Not yet. The flash of blue lights through the swirling snow should have meant relief, but Daniel knew better. Distance and weather made arrival slower than it looked, and the man outside had 2 minutes, maybe less, to make a final move. Rook stood rigid beside the broken window, hackles up, breath steaming and the cold air spilling inside. The shards of glass on the floor sparkled faintly in the firelight, sharp against the dark boards. Daniel glanced at Ellie. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed past him, on the window. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to speak, then closed again. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the storm. Her gaze didn't shift. "He's not running." Daniel scanned the snow beyond the window, seeing only the vague shifting of flakes in the wind. The man was either using cover or standing still in the whiteout, both dangerous. A muffled creak came from above. The roof again. Daniel's head snapped up. "He's going to try the hatch," he said, more to Rook than to Ellie. The K9 moved instantly, leaving the window and trotting toward the center of the cabin, positioning himself directly beneath the attic opening. His ears were pinned forward, every muscle primed. The sound above shifted into a slow crawl, deliberate, weighted steps crossing the roof toward the hatch. Daniel raised his weapon, keeping his other hand near the broom handle he'd used earlier to test the lock. If the man forced the panel, Daniel had one chance to stop him from dropping into the room. The hatch creaked faintly. Daniel steadied his stance. "You open that, you won't walk away." For a moment, it seemed the man might test him. Though it flexed ever so slightly, dust drifting down from the seams. Then, silence. Rook didn't move, his eyes locked upward. A faint scuff of boots sounded from the roof's edge, followed by a muted thump in the snow outside. The man had jumped down. Daniel moved to the front window, peering through the narrow gap in the curtain. The storm made it impossible to see more than 20 feet ahead, but the blue lights were closer now, cutting faint beams through the white. Ellie's whisper came from behind him. "He's still here." Daniel turned just in time to catch movement in his periphery, a dark figure slipping toward the side of the cabin, low and fast. He shifted to the side window, catching the man's outline just before it vanished toward the back door. Daniel moved quickly, motioning for Rook to follow. The K9 kept pace, his paws silent on the boards. They reached the back door just as the handle jiggled. Daniel planted himself in front of it, weapon raised. "That's far enough." The handle stilled. Then the man's voice, closer than ever, cold and sharp, "You're not taking her from me." Rook's growl rolled through the room. Daniel didn't answer. The less he spoke, the less he risked giving the man a rhythm to work against. The sound of boots crunching backward came next, but Daniel didn't believe it. He waited, listening. A thud hit the wall to his left. Then another, to his right. The man was testing again, moving quickly along the cabin's perimeter. Rook spun with each sound, tracking him without hesitation. The noise stopped at the front porch. Daniel moved, keeping low, until he had a view through the narrow front window. The figure was there, hood up, snow caking his shoulders. He stood perfectly still, staring at the door. Blue lights flashed behind him now, the backup unit was seconds away. The man seemed to notice too. He turned his head slightly toward the approaching vehicle. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the door. The wood groaned but held. Rook launched into a frenzy of barking, claws scraping the boards as he surged toward the impact. The man hit the door again, harder. This time, the frame cracked faintly. Daniel braced his shoulder against it from the inside. "Not happening," he muttered under his breath. Outside, the backup SUV slid to a stop in the snow. 2 deputies jumped out, weapons drawn, advancing fast. The man stepped back from the door, hands raised, but not toward surrender. Instead, he pointed directly at Ellie through the narrow glass panel. Rook's barking didn't stop until Daniel gave the sharp command, "Heel." The dog dropped into silence, though his body vibrated with the urge to move. The deputies reached the porch, shouting commands. The man didn't comply. He darted to the side, disappearing into the trees once more. Daniel threw the door open, Rook at his side, scanning the tree-line. But the storm had already swallowed him whole. The lead deputy's face was grim. "Tracks won't last long in this. We'll sweep, but..." Daniel nodded. "He's not gone for good." Behind them, Ellie stood framed in the cabin's doorway, the firelight at her back, Rook's leash in her hands. Her eyes were still fixed on the woods. "He'll come back," she said softly. And somehow, Daniel knew she was right. The storm didn't care about jurisdiction or urgency. It devoured sound, blurred outlines, and buried tracks as soon as they were made. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter and stepped off the porch, Rook at his side, the leash slack but ready. The 2 deputies fanned out, their flashlights cutting thin tunnels through the white curtain of snow. "North side," one of them called over the wind. "Tracks are faint but still visible." Daniel followed the voice, Rook's nose already low, tail stiff. The prints were shallow, half filled with drifting snow, but they angled toward the tree-line behind the cabin. "Stay sharp," Daniel warned. "He's fast when he wants to be." They moved into the trees, branches heavy with fresh snow sagging over the narrow path. Every few steps, a muffled thump of snow falling from above echoed in the cold air, each one making Daniel's grip tighten on his weapon. Rook pulled slightly left, sniffing hard at a patch of ground where the snow was churned differently, lighter, almost as if someone had paused there. Daniel crouched, scanning the pattern. The top layer was disturbed, but there was no print underneath. "He stopped here to listen," Daniel murmured. The deputy nearest him frowned. "Listen for what?" Daniel didn't answer, because at that moment, Rook froze, ears pricked, muscles locked, gaze fixed dead ahead. A dark shape moved between 2 pines about 30 yards out. The storm made it impossible to get a clear outline, but it was the height and build they were looking for. "Contact," Daniel whispered into his shoulder mic. The deputies tightened their formation, weapons raised. "Sheriff's Department." "Stop where you are." The figure didn't stop. It stepped behind a tree, vanishing from view. Rook let out one sharp bark, then lunged forward, dragging Daniel several steps before he tightened the leash. "Hold," Daniel ordered, voice low. The dog stilled, but his body vibrated like a coiled spring. They advanced, slow and methodical, keeping the tree line in sight. The wind shifted briefly, clearing the snow just enough to see the figure's head turn, not toward them, but toward the cabin in the distance. Daniel's stomach dropped. "He's not running from us. He's circling back." They pivoted instantly, moving fast through the drifts, retracing their own tracks toward the clearing. The storm stung Daniel's face, snow collecting on his lashes, but he kept his eyes locked on the shadow of the cabin through the white haze. A flicker of movement at the far corner made him push harder. He broke the tree line just in time to see the man stepping onto the porch. "Move!" Daniel barked, sprinting. The figure reached the door and pounded on it once. Not trying to break in, just a single, echoing knock. Inside, through the narrow glass panel, Daniel saw Ellie's small face appear. "No!" he shouted, his voice raw over the wind. She froze mid-step, her hand inches from the latch. The man turned his head toward her, that same unsettling smirk visible even in the storm. Then he stepped off the porch and vanished again into the treeline. Daniel reached the door seconds later, yanking it open and ushering Ellie back inside. "You do not open that for anyone," he said firmly, shutting the door hard behind him. Her voice was small. "I wasn't going to. I just wanted to see if he was really there." Rook pressed against her side, head tilted, sniffing at her hands. The deputies came in moments later, snow coating their shoulders. One shook his head. "He's playing with us. Doesn't want to be caught. Yet." Daniel holstered his weapon but didn't relax. "Then we changed the game." He crouched in front of Ellie again. "You said he doesn't give up. That he waits until you feel safe." She nodded slowly. "Then we don't give him that chance. When the weather breaks, we move you somewhere he can't follow." Her lips trembled. "He'll still find me." Rook let out a soft whine and nudged her hand with his nose. She glanced down at him, and for the first time that night, she smiled faintly. "He found me before," she whispered. Daniel stood, looking at the deputies. "We set a perimeter. No one leaves, no one gets close. He's not getting near this cabin again tonight." But as the wind howled and the walls creaked around them, Daniel knew the truth: the man out there wasn't done. Not by a long shot. And neither was he. The storm finally began to thin near midnight, the wind easing to a dull moan around the cabin. The snowfall slowed, revealing the aftermath: drifts piled high against the porch, branches heavy with white, the ground scarred with half-covered tracks. Daniel hadn't sat down once. He stood near the door, eyes scanning through the small glass panel, every muscle ready for the smallest flicker of movement. The deputies rotated patrols outside, their flashlights sweeping the perimeter in measured arcs. Rook paced quietly inside, his nails clicking on the wooden floor, stopping only to glance at Ellie in the corner. She hadn't spoken for nearly an hour, bundled in the thick blanket Daniel had wrapped around her. But she wasn't asleep, her gaze kept darting toward the windows, following sounds only she seemed to hear. "Talk to me, Ellie," Daniel said gently, keeping his eyes on the snow beyond the door. She hesitated. "Then, he's still out there. He's waiting for everyone else to leave." Daniel didn't deny it. "Then he's going to be disappointed tonight." The radio crackled in his ear. "Rains, sweep complete. No fresh tracks beyond the eastern tree line. We're holding position until dawn." "Copy that," Daniel replied, though he knew it didn't mean the threat was gone. A sudden bark from Rook broke the brief quiet. The dog spun toward the rear wall, hackles raised, a deep growl rising from his chest. Daniel moved instantly, drawing his weapon. "Stay with Rook," he told Ellie. The sound that followed was faint but distinct, a slow scrape, like wood against wood, from beneath the floor. "Crawl space." Daniel motioned to the nearest deputy outside the back door, who stepped in silently, weapon ready. They moved together toward the kitchen, stopping near the hatch. The scraping stopped as soon as they reached it. Rook's growl deepened, his body low, eyes fixed on the floorboards. Daniel whispered, "You hear that?" The deputy nodded. "Yeah. He's right under us." Daniel tapped his radio. "All units, converge on the cabin. We've got movement under the crawl space." Within seconds, boots pounded on the porch, the other deputy coming in through the front, sweeping his light toward the kitchen. Daniel kicked the chair away from the hatch, crouching to check the lock. It was intact, but the faint vibration of movement beneath it confirmed someone was down there. "On my signal," Daniel said, motioning for Rook to be ready. He counted to 3, then yanked the hatch open. Cold air surged up from the dark space below. The beam from the deputy's flashlight cut into the shadows, just in time to catch the man's face, pale and sharp beneath the hood, eyes glinting in the light. "Got him," the deputy barked. The man didn't run. Instead, he stared up at Daniel and said, almost conversationally, "She talks too much." Rook exploded forward before Daniel could even give the command, teeth snapping inches from the man's hand as he tried to reach up through the opening. The man flinched back, retreating into the shadows, but there was nowhere to go. The crawlspace had only one way out, and the deputies were already moving to block it from the outside. "Crawl out, hands first," Daniel ordered. "Do it now." The man's smirk faded, but slowly, he complied, inching forward on his stomach until his hands emerged into the light. They pulled him out fast, forcing him face down onto the kitchen floor. Cuffs clicked into place, the steel cold against his wrists. Ellie didn't move from her spot in the corner, but her eyes never left him. As they hauled the man to his feet, he turned his head toward her. "Told you I'd find you." Rook surged forward again, only Daniel's firm grip on the leash stopping him. "Not anymore," Daniel said flatly. The deputies led the man outside, their flashlights bobbing as they crossed the snow toward the waiting SUV. Daniel finally knelt beside Ellie. "He's done. He's not coming back." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached down and placed both hands on Rook's head. "You stayed," she whispered to him. Rook leaned into her touch, his tail giving one slow, steady wag. Daniel knew there'd be paperwork, court dates, and 1,000 questions waiting for all of them. But right now, as the storm eased and the cabin filled with the steady crackle of the fire, the only thing that mattered was that she was safe, and the man who'd hunted her was no longer in the dark. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to bleed into the snow, chasing away the night. And for the first time in hours, Ellie closed her eyes, Rook still at her side.